Everyone quotes the same line from Machiavelli, and almost everyone gets it wrong, including the people confidently repeating it online right now. Better to be feared than loved. That's the line. Here's what it actually doesn't mean, and you're about to hear the part that gets left out every single time it's quoted. Fear and hatred are not the same thing, and confusing the two is exactly what destroys the people who try to apply this rule badly. In the next few minutes, you're getting the actual mechanism behind this line, not the meme version that gets recycled without ever being understood. Quick disclaimer: this is an educational breakdown of historical philosophy and psychology, not professional advice. Here's the sentence in full, the part almost nobody quotes. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. But a wise ruler should avoid being hated, because fear and hatred can very well exist together. That second half changes everything about how this line should actually be applied. Let's break down exactly why, piece by piece. Why everyone misreads this line. Machiavelli wasn't advocating cruelty here. He was making a precise, almost clinical claim. Fear functions as a more stable psychological bond than love, specifically under pressure, but only if it never tips into hatred, because hatred is the actual mechanism that destroys everything fear was supposed to protect. Here's the underlying logic. Love is voluntary by definition. It's maintained only for as long as it's convenient for the other person to keep maintaining it. A friend who helps you purely out of affection will help you right up until helping becomes genuinely costly to them. And at that specific point, self-preservation usually wins out, because it's older and more deeply wired than social affection ever is. Fear operates differently. It attaches a real, tangible consequence to behavior, and that consequence doesn't fluctuate based on someone's current mood. It operates identically on their best day and their worst day. That structural consistency is exactly why fear-based systems, uncomfortable as it is to state plainly, consistently produce more reliable behavior than purely affection-based ones. But, and this is the part almost everyone conveniently skips, fear only stays genuinely useful if it never crosses over into hatred. The moment it does, you've lost everything fear was originally supposed to give you and gained something considerably more dangerous in its place. The actual difference between fear and hatred. Here's the distinction that actually matters, stated as plainly as possible. Fear comes from someone understanding, clearly, that real consequences exist and get applied consistently. Hatred comes from someone feeling they've been treated unjustly, humiliated, or wronged beyond anything the actual situation required or justified. You can absolutely make someone respect real consequences without ever making them hate you for it. A person who enforces clear standards fairly, even strictly, even without much warmth attached, tends to generate a kind of alert respect, not resentment. Someone who humiliates people in the process, applies consequences inconsistently depending on mood, or visibly seems to enjoy wielding power rather than simply using it when necessary, that generates genuine hatred. And hatred doesn't just fail to produce loyalty as a side effect. It actively produces the direct opposite. People quietly, patiently waiting for the first real opportunity to hurt you back. This is the exact line so many people miss when they try to apply better feared than loved in their actual lives. They read it as permission for cruelty. Machiavelli was specifically warning against exactly that outcome, not endorsing it. Fear without cruelty functions as respect with real consequences attached to it. Fear combined with cruelty becomes hatred, And hatred is arguably the single most dangerous position anyone can occupy in any relationship or hierarchy, because people who genuinely hate you aren't just unmotivated to help you succeed. They're actively motivated to watch you fail. The third option, nobody talks about. Most discussions of this quote present it as a strict binary: fear or love, pick one. There's actually a third state worth naming directly, because it's the one most people accidentally end up in without realizing it: indifference. Indifference is what happens when neither fear nor love is genuinely present, when there's no real consequence attached to behavior and no real affection motivating it either. This tends to be the quiet, unglamorous failure mode of people who avoid conflict so thoroughly that they never build fear, while simultaneously never investing enough to build genuine love either. Indifference is arguably worse than either extreme, because it produces no reliable behavior at all. People neither fear disappointing you nor feel motivated by genuine affection to show up for you. Machiavelli didn't spend much time on this state directly, likely because it rarely produces anything dramatic enough to study. It simply produces slow, quiet irrelevance, which is its own kind of danger entirely. Why this is wired into your brain, not just old political theory. This isn't purely historical philosophy. It's backed by something measurable in modern psychology: loss aversion. The pain of losing something is felt roughly twice as intensely as the pleasure of gaining an equivalent thing. This has been demonstrated repeatedly across behavioral economics research. That asymmetry means a credible threat of loss reliably motivates faster, more consistent action than an equal promise of gain ever does. Fear, which your brain files under potential loss, produces faster behavioral change than love, filed under potential gain. This isn't because love is somehow weak or less valuable. It's because your nervous system evolved under conditions where a single missed danger could genuinely be fatal, while a single missed reward almost never was. Machiavelli had zero access to this research, obviously. He arrived at essentially the same conclusion nearly 5 centuries earlier, purely through cold, careful observation of real behavior. That's not luck or coincidence. That's precisely what happens when someone studies human behavior with total honesty, instead of describing how they'd prefer it worked. Where this shows up in your actual, ordinary life. Take this completely out of politics and history for a moment. Think about compliance in your own daily routine, the report finished on time, not purely from pride in the work itself, but because you know exactly what happens if it arrives late. The apology offered before you fully process the underlying feeling, because you understand the relationship cost of delaying it. The specific boundary you never cross with one particular person, not necessarily from deeper respect than you hold for anyone else, but because direct experience has already taught you what happens when you do. None of this makes you weak or manipulative. It makes you human. The exact same warning Machiavelli gave rulers centuries ago applies here just as directly. A boundary respected because someone genuinely understands a fair, real consequence exists. That's healthy, ordinary human dynamics. A relationship where someone complies purely out of dread, where the underlying feeling running underneath is closer to resentment than actual respect. That's the human scale, everyday version of exactly the trap Machiavelli spent his entire career warning rulers away from. How to actually use this without becoming the villain of your own story. Here's the fully practical version of everything covered so far. The goal was never to make yourself feared in the ugly, ordinary sense most people assume that word means. The actual goal is making consequences real, consistent, and fairly applied across the board, so that respect naturally comes to include a healthy awareness of what happens if trust gets broken, without that awareness ever tipping over into genuine cruelty. Practically, that means following through on what you say every single time, not selectively, only when it happens to be convenient. It means applying consequences evenly, regardless of your particular mood on a given day. It means never reaching for humiliation, unpredictability, or deliberate cruelty as tools for control, because none of those actually build the stable, useful fear Machiavelli was describing. They build precisely the corrosive hatred he was explicitly warning against. And this framework cuts both directions equally. It's also exactly how you identify when someone is using this dynamic on you personally. If someone keeps you compliant primarily through unpredictability, humiliation, or the persistent quiet threat of withdrawing affection whenever it suits them, that's not the healthy fear and respect balance Machiavelli described as sustainable. That's the exact trap he warned against, simply aimed at you directly instead of at an entire kingdom. Machiavelli didn't write that line to teach cruelty as a virtue. He wrote it because he was finished pretending human behavior worked the comfortable way people wished it did, instead of confronting how it actually, observably functions. Fear, used carefully and applied fairly, was never actually the villain in this particular story. Unpredictable, humiliating, fundamentally unjust fear is the villain, the specific kind that curdles into hatred and eventually turns decisively on whoever originally created it. This week, run one honest, private audit on a relationship in your life where you comply more than you genuinely like to admit out loud, and ask yourself directly which version of fear is actually operating underneath that dynamic. If this reframed something for you today, tell me in the comments which specific relationship came to mind while you were watching. And if you want the next one the moment it drops, subscribe, because next time we're covering the other, equally important half of this exact rule. I'll see you in the next one.